In this video, let's model open economy with exchange rates. Let's use our saving investment model. So here's the setup of the model. It has a set of exogenous variables, the other exogenous variables that are derived from these exogenous variables, and then there is this endogenous variable and other endogenous variable that is derived from this particular endogenous variable. So the setup of the model is you have output, total output, or GDP, which is given by the production function, the parameters that defines the consumption function, the parameters that defines the investment function, the parameters or the variables of the fiscal policy, so government and taxes minus transfers, parameters defining the net exports function, and then the world interest rate represented by this R star. Once we have these exogenous variables set up, we just make some numbers up, and then we can use these numbers to get our budget balance. Then we can get the consumption function, which is 300 plus 0.8, 18,000 minus 2,500. Savings is y, 18,000 minus c, 12,700 minus g, which is 3,000. Real interest rate is equal to the world real interest rate, which is 5. And then investments is this 5,000 minus 400 times 5. So that's 3,000. And then this 2,300 minus 3,000 gives us minus 700, which is the saving investment gap or net capital outflow. And notice that this saving investment gap or net capital outflow has to equal to the net exports, which is a function of the real exchange rates. And so in this equation, the right hand side is just a constant, just a number. And then you just have one unknown, which is the real exchange rate, and you solve for real exchange rate and you can get this number. And once you have this real exchange rate, you can plug that value in the net export function and get the net exports value. Now let's come to this graph. On vertical axis, here we are measuring the real exchange rate, and on horizontal axis we are measuring the dollars. So the interpretation is that this is the supply and demand of foreign exchange market. So the demand curve over here is this line, which is downward sloping, and the supply of these foreign dollars is given by the net capital outflow, which is the savings minus investments. Now keep in mind that this nx function is negative. You can clearly see over here the slope is negative, and the idea is that as exchange rate is high, the domestic goods will become more expensive for the foreigners and the exports will go down. So there is an inverse relationship between exchange rate and net exports. And also notice that one can have a trade deficit whereby the investments are greater than the savings, or net capital outflow is a negative number, meaning you are having an inflow. That is to say that you are a net borrower as a country, or you can have a positive value, meaning the savings is greater than investments, and as a country you are lending to the other parts of the world. Now let's see how we can use this model to understand real world developments. And in real world there could be many shocks that could be hitting the economy. You can have a consumption shock, you can have an investment shock, you can have a government expenditure shock or the tax shock, which is the fiscal policy shocks, or you can have policies that restrict trade, so trade policies. You can also have shocks from the rest of the world, and as a country, the country might get affected by these shocks, which is going to happen through this R star. So let's assume that there is an expansionary fiscal policy of $500 billion. What's going to happen? Because the government is spending more, the savings in the economy will be less. And keep in mind, this is also measuring the supply of dollars. So because the government is spending more, the net capital outflow is going to go down and the supply of the dollars is also lower. As the supply goes down, the price of the currency or the dollar in this example goes up, and the appreciation of the dollar is going to lower the exports. As a result, you will see a widening of the trade deficit from $700 billion to $1.2 trillion. One can also imagine that there is an increase in investment spending by $500 billion. This could happen because the business climate is good and businesses feel positive to expand. And if that is the case, you get exactly the same effect, which perfectly makes sense because if either we say that savings goes down because of increased government spending or investments goes up because of positive mood in the business community, effectively it would end up being the same in terms of the appreciation of the exchange rate and the widening of the trade deficit that we have in this particular example. The other thing that could happen could be that the governments across the world could be in an expansionary mode, and the government across the world is spending more. As a result, the savings in the world will go down, increasing the world interest rate. So let's assume that there is the world interest rate goes up by 1%. As a result, the new interest rate that the economy is going to face is 6%. Now, because the interest rate has gone up, the investment goes down. You can clearly see over here the investment goes down from 3,000 to 2,600, and that is given by the shift of this curve, the saving investment curve or the net capital outflow curve to the right. Meaning, what is happening over here is that there is more supply of dollars in this foreign exchange market, and because there is more supply of the dollars, the price of the dollars goes down, and hence it is positive boost to the net exports. The US goods will be cheaper for the foreigners. As a result, the exports will go up, and you can clearly see that instead of having a deficit of 700, we now would have a deficit of 300 because of the expansionary fiscal policy that is done by the world or the foreign governments. You can also think about, say, a trade restriction, right? Because this comes up commonly in the media, whereby the government is trying to help certain segments of the industry and is using a trade uh, policies to restrict or supports imports or exports. So let's take an example where the government is going to restrict the import of certain goods from other countries, may it be steel from some country or cars from some country. In either case, the government is going to restrict the amount of imports. And the idea being you want to protect the domestic industry because there is perhaps a case that the foreign goods are so cheap that the domestic industries are not able to thrive, and as a result, the government is trying to restrict the imports. So, given that rationale, let's say that if the government is going to place a restriction on imports, the net exports, the intercept would, or the constant part of the intercept would go up by 500. Right? So this is going to shift the net export function vertically up. And there is a very interesting thing that happens. If you look at it, the trade balance is still a trade deficit of $700 billion. And this policy to restrict imports or enhance exports has no impact on the trade balance. And why is that happening? That is happening because though these policies is going to boost net exports, because of this policy, the given the fact that the supply of dollars is fixed, that has not changed. This S minus I has not changed. As a result, the currency is going to appreciate. In this case, US dollar is going to appreciate. And if the dollar appreciates, then it is going to be detrimental for the exports. So any increase that is supported by the trade restriction is completely offset by a decrease in exports due to an appreciation of the currency.